Hi, everyone. Welcome to Turning Point. I'm your host, Blaine Birch, co-founder and CEO at Dryrun. And today I'm really excited to have Aimee LaLiberte from My Virtual CFO joining me. Aimee and I, just before we got on the show, I was just talking that we get to talk with CFOs all the time, some of my favorite people. So I'm really excited to have you on the show, Aimee.
Thanks. I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me, Blaine.
So before we dive into a little bit of what you're doing now, I'd love to hear kind of how you got started. What was your first sort of, step into, being an entrepreneur, or the first things that led you that direction?
Yeah. So I think I was destined to do entrepreneurship and to have the life of an entrepreneur. But for me, like my business, I've had businesses beforehand, but the business that I have now didn't start until 5 years ago. And the way that I arrived here was that I always had this fascination with money, how it was made in terms of earning it, how it was transacted. And so again, earning the money was always that thing. And I just realized that when it came time for me to have a job, I started working in colleges at a college doing um, creating fundraising goals for the organization. And then what ended up happening was that I then learned how to do the back end operation of it. So I started in the finance department and building out these very large campaigns. So, worked on campaigns that created 50 million, $100 million in revenue, and looking at it not just from the how are we going to create the money in terms of the fundraising, in terms of the strategy side of it, but then also from a financial perspective, are we in a position, can we create the systems and the financial systems to be able to record that if we have multi-level pledges and all of that stuff. So all of that to be said that was my life for about 20 years. And then when I decided, I was sort of at the end of I've done a lot to create this. I saw the pathway that I could become a vice president at a college. I realized that was not really what I had in store for myself. And what I really wanted to do was take all of that information that I had and that I had created, and then deliver it to small businesses. So that's where my virtual CFO came from, was really starting to work with small businesses who didn't have necessarily access to a person who had that CFO future focused skill set that they needed, because they wanted to create the big things in their business, but it wasn't the thing that they were necessarily skilled at, because they didn't start their business to do all the financial stuff. They started their business to do whatever the service or product it was. So that's kind of how it unfolded. I had some businesses. I had this first business that I had was a design your own dress center for little girls. And it was so much fun to do, but I realized, number one, I did not enjoy the process in which sourcing the materials, and then each dress was custom made. And so, and then also just the production cost. So the cost of goods sold for that really left my profit margins at a minimum, and understanding and finding that I created a business that I was more in love with, instead of one that had profitability into it, and realizing that I didn't really want to try to figure it out. And that I was okay, this was a fun experience, let's move on. And so I've definitely had setbacks in my entrepreneurial journey, but I also think that all of them help prepare me for what I do now.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's hard for me to look at those as setbacks, because those are, they're just such key learnings, right? And I think we're at you might be episode 30, I think, something like that. So,
Perfect.
we had quite a few entrepreneurs on, and one thing that we hear over and over again is very few entrepreneurs started one business and it just went great, and they went I think our record is, Mike had 12 or 13 businesses. That was, I think, our record is the most businesses, my last interview with Josh, if anyone's, you'll see it on the list, Josh Little, he's in software, but he also has a pickle business. And it was interesting talking to him about the pickle business, because it was a passion and he loved it, but it was a little bit like you were talking, is he's like, yeah, but the underlying numbers and the market and everything went, this isn't the right fit for the business. It's fun and it's a side business, but he realized it was something that was really would be an incredible challenge, or maybe not possible to scale to where he would want it to go. So that's a terrific learning, right? It's really, you know, that's how you know to recognize the one that makes sense.
Yeah. And I also think that, you know, for me, when I started this business, that my thought was business owners avoid their finances. Like that was my working hypothesis, was that
Yeah.
they avoid their finances, right? And they avoid their finances because they are not in a relationship with their money. And so they're not in a relationship with their money because, again, they didn't start their businesses so that they can do their own bookkeeping. It was just sort of this like thing they had to do, but it was something that often got pushed to the bottom of the list. And they just thought, but then, so it was like bookkeeping was like the service that I started out providing, because I felt like that was the thing that people could be like, okay, I got it, I get it. And so then there was like, that's how I started. And then I with that dress business I was telling you about, I met Mike Michalowicz, who's the author of Profit First.
Yes.
And when I met him, it was like Profit First wasn't even a thing. It was the toilet paper entrepreneur was the one that he was promoting at that point. And I just thought, okay, I got to see what this guy's doing, because I was really fascinated with him. And then you could get certification in Profit First, because I also knew lack of organization and bookkeeping was like problem number one. Problem number two was cash flow. So then I was like, okay, Profit First is the solution to that. And I really started baking like a recipe, if you will. And then it wasn't until I would speak on like chamber panels and do all of that, that I was speaking from like a bookkeeping perspective. But then the other folks on the panel would say, like, audience, Aimee's talking from a bookkeeping perspective. We want to temper your expectations. What she's doing, what she's talking to you about is very much CFO level stuff. It's high level strategic perspective. So if you go to hire a bookkeeper and you think you're going to get somebody like Aimee, know that like she's doing something else outside of that. And it was interesting because I didn't realize that that's what I was doing. That was part of what I delivered in terms of my service, was like, okay, we're going to like do strategy. And then like, that's where my virtual CFO really came. So even in this business, there's been iterations of it. And then most recently, again, it was like the mindset stuff. Because again, you could have all like the pristine books, you can have good cash flow. If you are operating a business from a scarcity mindset, and if you have these like limiting beliefs about you and your capacity to create any financial goal, that you're going to make it 10 times harder than it needs to be to create the goal. So it's like, again, so then, you know, becoming certified in terms of like coaching was like this whole other thing. So again, I feel like it's been this folding in of like skills that has created this like signature process that I have and I do with my clients.
Yeah, it's for those of you out there that are like listen to us, you know, or have talked with us at the Dryrun side. Aimee doesn't really know probably what we even do here, but we speak the same language. And because we're kind of in that same space, and the things you're describing, we're always talking with our customers about monitor, manage, and model. And monitoring is to make sure your bookkeeping has to be up to date, and you're looking at risk factors. Cash management, of course, is all about cash flow, and modeling is about those higher level decisions and planning and looking forward and all that. So we speak so much of the same language, and it's some of the things you mentioned really resonate with me, because when my first business, I took my finances seriously and found out later a lot of business owners don't. And so even now, a lot of the people that are partners with Dryrun are all financial professionals, because we know that's how you make business successful, is to have a financial professional like you looking over their shoulder, making sure the books are up to date. Otherwise you don't know where you're going, and being able to manage that cash flow and figure out like where you're going. So it's but I don't want to go into some chat about Dryrun or anything, but it's we're talking so much the same language here that I find it really interesting. One thing that I do find that I do want to dig into a little bit, just because I find it really interesting, is you started out in nonprofits. And I know, like, I've talked with a lot of, EDs and nonprofits, and they sometimes are actually even a step behind a lot of business owners as far as finances go. They're very passionate about what they're doing. But having that a real strong financial mind there is really what makes a nonprofit so often really grow and really sing. And what I'm curious about is when you took a job and you're looking at a nonprofit, this is more my curiosity, but I know when you're selling a product or service, it's like, yeah, I know exactly what I'm selling and, who to go to and all that kind of thing. How did you start doing those predictions early on for a nonprofit, saying, here's how we can actually grow your revenue, your donations?
Yeah. So, oh my God, this is like, I feel like I'm like, you've invited me to nerd out on my former life. So this is how it would work. So it's a similar way of, I worked a lot of my career was in colleges and universities.
Mhm.
And so for those models, those nonprofit models, it was driven off of like alumni donations, and philanthropy is like a large driving factor. Obviously there's like corporates and founds
Mhm.
and there's other like friends and whatever, but we're going to stick with that. So these larger entities would have departments where there would be like research on
Mhm.
individuals, and there would be screening to see what sort of indicators that they have. And so I oversaw departments that would do exactly that. So again, if let's say that an organization is like, we want to do a campaign and we think we're going to do $50 million, we would test that out based on identifying who are the potential alumni prospects that we think would be a really good fit. And we start to like test
Mhm.
the concepts and what the initiatives would be and to see whether or not they would resonate. And we would even ask them to identify, like, if we were to do this today, and we were to ask you for a contribution, like, where do you see yourself? And so we would be able to get that information. So it's almost like, again, testing it out before we go all the way in, create the collateral, announce it and everything.
Mhm.
Like, we really wanted to make sure that is. But in the meantime, we understood that, okay, if we're going to do a $50 million campaign, we're going to need this many people or individual entities or whatever to make a $5 million gift. We're going to need this many to make 2.5, 1 million, all the way down to like just a general, like any donation, no matter what the size is. And then to that, to make sure that I think every organization, what I've never been able to really distill, and I have a couple of theories, is like there's a sweet spot in that like category of giving, right? So
Okay.
there are some organizations that may not have the big capacity for like a $5 million gift, but they may be really, really dialed in to somebody who like in the $250,000. So it's really like, here's what I think the table of gifts is going to look like in order for us to create this result. And then here's the reality of it based on the types of donors that you have historically, as well as like, who are your donors that have the highest inclination to want to give a gift, and then really tinkering it out that way. So sometimes it might be that your gift goals are driven off of that middle of the road donor rather than like your top end leadership donors, and really just tinkering with that. But it, again, like business, this is not like a one size fits all approach. There's a different energy and vibe and just context. And really, so that's where the numbers come in, is that if you're seeing the results come in and you see that maybe, this offer, this service that you have is outperforming all these others, that's the invitation to get really curious. Is that because you guys are really clear on like what this service is and this is what the demand is? Or is it that this is like really what they want, we just haven't figured out the marketing, or
Yeah.
maybe the price point is. So it's really this whole laboratory, if you will, of figuring out the financial makeup of it, but not saying it's just a financial issue, it's just a marketing issue. It's like a full bodied issue of the business.
Yeah. Yeah. We had Per Showforce on a few episodes ago, and he's a pricing expert. And it's amazing how he's talking from, I guess, a little bit of the other side of just on pricing, but it goes right into, he says it's a very holistic view of like, who's your customer, and how are you marketing to them? What are the valuers? All of these sorts of things that you're talking about. And it's so interesting because you know, as you are helping more and more businesses now, it, you know, that's where you're transcending, like you said, like bookkeeping is so essential because you have to know where you're at, and it has to be bang on, it has to be right there. You have to have that
Mhm.
information, but you're transcending that so much to get into how do you make a business profitable? What channels make the most sense? Are you actually making a profit off of some of your products and services? Because oftentimes businesses believe they are and they actually aren't. You know, they
Right.
find out later, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I also think it also comes down to like working with the clients that I work with is like personnel utilization. So
Mhm.
if you have folks who are in like are revenue generating, but they may not be like in that revenue generating capacity to the extent that then makes the cost center as the individual profitable, that can weigh you down as well. So it's not just
Mhm.
I work with a lot of medical practices, group practices. So it could very well be that like overall your practice is strong and profitable. And when we start to go into like, how do we make it better? We can find out that we know that a full-time therapist needs to be hitting that 22 um, client load in order for us to create the financial result and to pay
Mm.
them and to do and all of that. And there could be somebody who's like at 30 and someone who's at 15, and you don't see that sort of like distinction
Yeah.
in a general number, but it's really breaking it down. And it's like, okay, we need to make sure we have to raise the utilization of this this person in this case, or like this product, in order to make sure that everything lifts more, because that's really where you're going to find the opportunities to create a more efficient, a more profitable business.
Yeah. And you know, the fact is that I think a lot of business owners don't realize is um, like profit margins, there's not, you know, when they first get into business, they don't realize, they think profit margins are massive. Generally,
Mhm.
for most businesses, profit margins, that your net profit is actually, it's not very much. And
Right.
small, you know, small changes can actually make a really big difference. And trying to remember who I was talking with the not too long ago, I was talking about the 1%. Maybe it was Paris actually talking about the 1% difference, and just like a 1% difference in pricing actually over a year can make quite a substantial difference to your profit margin. Easy to overlook when you don't actually visualize it and understand the problem. You hear it, but you don't understand it necessarily.
Yeah, well, and if I can pull in like my work with Profit First for a second, that's one of the things. So often, what I have seen with working with businesses is that they're out of alignment in terms of their operating expenses as compared to all the other factors.
Mm.
And so again, let's say that a company's like optimal operating expense percentage is 40%. And let's say after we do an assessment, their real number is 65%. I would never recommend a company go from 65 to 40 in a quarter, because it would do so much
Mhm.
damage to the business model, which is why we do things like, okay, we're going to implement Profit First, and we're going to do so in a very slow, intentional way, because number one, we want to keep the integrity and the quality of the business intact. And number two, we want to make sure that this transformation that you're seeking is like long term. If I
Mhm.
take you from, it's like any sort of like a diet. If you go on a
Yeah.
crash diet, this like, whatever it is, as soon as you're like off the diet, you then just gain all the weight back. So what we do is like we say, okay, 1%, or we want to make 1% of expense cuts this quarter. Maybe it's going to be 2%. And we can be a little bit more aggressive, I think, on the front end. But when I say aggressive, I mean maybe 3% cut.
Yeah.
And the reason why is because, again, we don't want to create a downward spiraling your business
Mhm.
because we're making these changes. We want to do it long term. But I think that's the point. The 1% that
Yeah.
has an impact, and it's like that compounding effect.
And you know, like what you're speaking to, it's 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 so critical to have a financial professional like you working with a business on a regular basis, like on a weekly basis, multiple times a week, minimum, like, I don't know, like once a month would, even for really small businesses. But that's something that we're we see all too often as businesses that they get their, their quarterly financials, quite a bit after probably the quarter, and they can see what happened, and that's all. And somehow they think, okay, that's proper financial management because my accountant sent me this and that's where it is. And no, that's completely wrong. It's this regular operational, cash flow and sales projections. And it has to be ongoing all the time. That's where you grow. That's where you make success. That's where you build profit. And it is the most essential tool for a business. And too often we see business owners limp along trying to do it themselves, and usually they'll lose interest way too quickly and just go, I'll just, worry about my top line and hope I can stay ahead. And it holds them back from actually growing.
Yeah, I think you the word there that I really like hooked on to is hope. Like, I love people that are hopeful, but like having hope in your financials in that kind of realm is not the type of CEO behavior that you want to have. Like, you want to have a relationship with your financials. You want to have, I love to do CFO dates. If you're somebody who, for whatever reason, you want to still do the financials yourself, if you're doing them on a weekly basis and you're having that relationship with them and understanding and being able to answer the questions and all of that, I think that that's great. But so often that's the thing that, they're not going to do. But if you're willing to have that cadence, it's going to be helpful. But I think a lot of what at least I feel like I serve as is, number one, a sounding board to help, like, this is what I want to do. This is what I want to create. How do you think we can get there from like this financial perspective? There's that, like, holding space and being able to do the math and the strategy around that.
Yeah.
But also it's the accountability, because these business owners that hire me, they know they're not going to, like, if they're left to their own, they're not going to do it themselves. They're going to, like, it's just going to, the temptation to go do something else with it, because it's not the reason, like I said, it's not the reason they got into business.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's usually what's holding them back from really growing, right? The lack of systems and processes and attention to detail, rather than, I really like what I'm doing, or I'm really familiar with it. Like, when I started my first business, it was it didn't start as a creative agency. It started as me designing stuff. And then it grew into an agency with, some bigger clients and of course all of that. And, but fortunately, I'm looking back, I'm like, I had a bit of an aptitude for it. And I always say I had a bit of an aptitude. And then when 2009 hit, I was forced to get a real aptitude to understanding cash flow. And that's where everything comes from Dryrun's perspective, is transforming my business that way and seeing how much impact it could have by, having those processes, those systems, and knowing what's happening in your business, actually keeping track of it. And it's too many business owners just, some of the saddest ones, I think, saddest sort of cases we see are business owners, their business is actually doing fine. And you realize, yeah, but you're leaving so much on the table because you think, well, it's doing fine. It could be 10x that business over a number of years, because you're not grabbing this opportunity that's just presented to you on a silver platter. And it's just, and they don't know. I think they don't realize what sort of impact these refinements and systems and processes can have in their business.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also one of the things that I can see is that once we get a really great cadence and they're creating the results and they're doing the consistency, they start to think, oh, maybe I can just do this all myself again. And maybe I can do this. And like, there's this temptation again to like bring it back in. And that's where it's like, again, that next opportunity of like, we're creating the results because you are not, like, this is not taking up headspace for you. You have confidence and clarity in your financials because you're not doing them, and it's like you're coming into the relationship from a very different lens than you were when you, like, before you hired me. So it's really fascinating to see how all of that unfolds. But then at the same time, I also think that I try to honor the space that my clients are in. I may see their potential in terms of like, oh yeah, you can scale this to X 10 times what it is, but that might not be the season that client is in. And making sure that it's not the right time for whatever reason they want it
Mhm.
to be, and not an excuse because they're scared and because they're allowing fear to get in the way. And
Yeah.
again, using that mindset stuff that like from like coaching and all that, really being able to discern and poke holes into like their thoughts about it is really helpful for me to see whether or not like, is this a scarcity mindset issue, or is this just the season I'm in, this is where I am. And I do see the potential. And yet I know I just want to hold tight. I always think that I was a competitive swimmer. And what I have found is that a lot of my like training, I was a distance swimmer too,
Mm.
but the pace setting in distance swimming, I think is very helpful for me to use and to reference when I'm
Mm.
working with businesses.
That's a um there's a few things I want to dive into there, but one of them I think is and what we see oftentimes with our partners that are financial professionals, one of the biggest challenges they have is how they talk with their clients about this. And I like how you describe that as coaching. And because as I imagine, because you were an elite athlete, that was something you became probably really familiar with. It's a great way to sort of think about how how you can like on the like this distance swimmer, this marathon, you're not doing a big overnight win. It's over this long term, week to week to week. How do you move those business owners along and have them find success? And coaching is just a great way. Like how did sort of that coaching work into? Was it natural for you, or have you sort of studied coaching, or because you've been an athlete, or how did that sort of work into what you're doing now?
So the reason I got into like getting like certified and all that was largely because I knew that from being an athlete, I knew that the mindset was a critical part. And so I was like, I really just want to make sure that I have like a certification, a modality, and like just like dialed in on that. So that's sort of where that came folding in. And I'm just about done with a program, and that was all about, I mean, it's called Coaching Masters. And part of it was because I knew that it was there.
Mhm.
I just didn't I hadn't created a space where I could take all of like the tools that I've collected out and put them down and really start using it as a playground to say, oh yes, here it goes here. And one of the things that I uncovered in this like last 6 months, if you will, is how having this 12-year career in swimming. I mean, like, and I mean 12-year career from the standpoint of like, I started swimming when I was 9, and I stopped at 21. And then I started doing marathon running. But like, again, how like the coaching. So like, again, there's this like, in terms of business. So I started when I was 9. That
Mhm.
my goal was just to like get in the pool and swim. Like I didn't even compete until I was 10. I started to
Yeah.
compete, but I was a generalist. Did all the races. And then it wasn't until I was 13 that I thought, gosh, I really like this distance swimming thing. I got to like see what this is about. And then I specialized. And I think how that turns into like um a business analogy is the fact that like I think businesses are like they have to niche down like right away.
Mhm.
And I think sometimes it's like, well, sometimes there's a season where you're just figuring out what you like, what you don't like, and you're just getting the reps in. And then
Yeah.
you realize, oh, I really like swimming long distance, or like maybe it's, I really like, this is the type of client that I like to work with. And for me, it's like, I like to work with businesses that are generating up to $5 million in annual revenue. I don't tend to work with businesses larger than that because they're usually already having like a full service in-house finance department that I just feel like my success of working with businesses $5 million and under, that like that's sort of my sweet spot now.
Mhm.
So there's that, but then it's like, okay, now how can I create this? And so again, with the distance swimming thing is that there were seasons when all I did in practice was like really practicing my breathing so that I could elongate like my like breath in order to like keep my head down so that I wasn't exerting energy going like turning over to take a breath. So it's like, again, like
Mhm.
there's different times. So when I look at like my entire swim career, I can see like, okay, I can see how coaching and like using strategy had created the result that when I was in college, completing my swimming and like swimming the fastest I ever had, it was like this whole like, like 11-year situation of like building to that point. And I think the same
Mhm.
goes for business. So it's really like for me recently, really realizing how being an athlete transcended into that. Like I think I knew it was there, but I wasn't aware as how important and helpful it has been.
Yeah. I think it's, something that as businesses we're told over and over again, focus, niche, become the best in the world at what you're doing. And I've early on in my career, I was just, again, more of a generalist, and we'd just be like, oh, that's such a cool thing. Let's build it,
Hmm.
let's build this touchscreen kiosk thing. And no one had done that yet. Let's do it.
Hmm.
And you realize looking back, it's not a great way to build a really competitive business. It's tough until you start to focus. But the way you described it, I think is a great way to explain to people, if you want to be like, look at an elite athlete, they figure things out, and they figure out where they're the best at, and then focus down. And then you have this coach that's going, here's your priority. We're not going to do everything. This is the priority right now. And so you can actually make some motion. So it's instead of the old, boil the ocean sort of idea, you
Hmm.
focus, you prioritize, and you focus on a niche. And that's when you see businesses really excel. And I know it's as a business owner, it can be scary to do that and think, well, I'm going to cut out all of this potential market and all of these ones and all of that. Um, but that's where you really excel. And so I think that was a really great example of why a business needs to have that focus and that discipline.
Hmm. No, absolutely. And it's nice when you have experiential sharing to have with clients, because again, it just offers that context. And I also
Mhm.
think that it shows you like, and I think it invites them to say, okay, like I just pulled back from like the ages of 9 to 21, something that I'm carrying with me. I assure you that there are experiences that any business owner can pull back from their youth, that they are like they pulled into the present moment. They just may not realize that that's like that was its origin. And
Yeah.
it can be such a wonderful opportunity to really like build on that.
Yeah. That's another good point, is something, finding that place where it's relatable for them, so that they
Hmm.
really thoroughly understand it. And um, this has been a really fascinating conversation. I know we've been talking for a while here, but
Hmm.
I'd like to actually circle in and get really, into my virtual CFO a bit, and that's what you're working on now, and like what sort of businesses, you mentioned like up to 5 million, but what sort of businesses do you are you really passionate about, or really want to be able to help, and how do you do that? How do you have an engagement with them?
Yeah. So, like I said, so I believe that there's this ascension of like the business, right? So there's the business owners that are just starting out, and they may not be in a cash position capacity to bring on somebody like me to do it, but they need to have sort of the like 101s, if you will, of it.
Mhm.
And so I have started building out a curriculum to help provide them with the tools, so that it's not just I'm going to like guess that these are all the things, and I'm going to go into the Googles and hodgepodge myself like a plan together. Like this is like um it's called the finance edit, and it's like really like volumes. So it's stacked upon it. So it's like volume 1 is this, volume 2. So
Mhm.
there's that part of it. Then I have clients all the way up to clients that are like completely outsourced function. So I handle the bookkeeping and the CFO services. I intentionally do not have a tax service in my business. That is incredibly intentional. I really
Mhm.
believe in segregation of duties. I believe that the person that's in your books in like on an ongoing daily basis should not be the person looking at it from a tax lens. I know that I might be in like the minority there, but it's just something like, again, working from the nonprofit realm, it's one of
Mhm.
those things of making sure that the same person isn't doing every single part of your financial process. The exposure, the risk exposure, I would rather you have multiple partners that are excellent at what they're doing for your business, for you and your business. So when I work with them, usually what they're coming into me is the following. Number one, they've had somebody doing like their like bookkeeping that's already an in-house person, or they are the CEO and they are doing the books and they're just done with it. They don't want to do it anymore. And they say, we need somebody to come in and do it. So then it starts out with the books, and everything that they usually tell me has to do with like the bookkeeping, like the act of bookkeeping. And then they start telling me their vision. And then I see that there's the strategy. And that's really the opportunity for me to say, you're coming to me for bookkeeping and we can do that. But what you really desire is this. And we also do this. And it's really the visioning. How do I create, how do I figure out what's working in the business, what's not? Why is it that I'm doing really well in revenue, but I feel like I have no cash in the bank? And we really start to educate our clients based on all of that. So, we go through the process of doing that. And then we really start to distill it down to like, what are your goals? Like, what is it that you want? And let's see the vision. And then let's start plotting towards creating that and making that a reality. And so again, like, what is the point of when can I bring on the next hire? When can I do this? Like these questions that you simply can't figure out if we don't have good numbers and if we don't have a good understanding of what the plan of action is. So that's what like I do at the highest level. And then like right now in the center area, which is I think the business owner that is beyond beginners, but maybe not quite in that other capacity. What I'd like to do with them is take what I have in that beginner model and then just put it into a group setting. And so that it's like a collective of people like talking about their financials and then really just workshopping and hot seating into that so that they're able to then like take that information, continue to apply it and come back. And eventually the whole idea of it is to ascend into that one-on-one container.
Yeah. Yeah. That's sounds like really fascinating because you're helping a large range of clients, even though you know exactly what niche they're in. If people want to find, and they should be, if you have a business out there and you're don't believe you have that financial management and that strategic outlook that you need, definitely look Aimee up. Aimee, how would they track you down?
Yeah. So if you go to my website, myvirtualcfo.co, that's where you can find out about me. You can find out about what I'm currently up to in terms of offerings. You can get on the wait list for any future programs that I will be releasing. And yeah.
That's terrific. Well, I've really enjoyed having you on the show, Aimee. Again, Aimee Liberty with My Virtual CFO. Again, I'm Blaine Birch, co-founder and CEO at Dryrun. If you're looking for some help with your cash management, financial modeling, that's what Dryrun is all about, especially if you're a CPA or like Aimee, a virtual CFO. We love to help professionals offer advisory services to their clients. Please come check us out. Thanks again, Aimee. I really appreciate your time. It was a terrific conversation.
Thanks for having me.